things that we're facing, and we think, okay, when we get through, we have arrived. But sometimes it's the going through itself that is you arriving. It's not some end stop. The process itself, it's you arriving. That's how I'm seeing the work of leadership.
Welcome to What Works, where nonprofit leaders share real stories about what makes impact possible and their organizations thrive. Because success has patterns, and often the best kept secrets aren't found in the boardroom. Today, I get the privilege of meeting with Dr. Sharon. She's a wife, a mom, an author, a responsive strategist, and does data stories. Dr. Sharon has spent over 20 years helping federal agencies and helping community-rooted organizations bring clarity to complexity. And I'm so excited to hear how storytelling can fill those gaps. I'm excited to hear today what she has seen in life and how we can benefit from it. Dr. Sharon, welcome to What Works. And please give us a little idea of who you are, what you work with, and then we'll get into it.
I love it. No, thank you so much, Marla, for having me. I am so excited and just honored to be able to share space with you and your audience today. And I'll just say briefly to add to all that you shared that I live in the southern U.S. and I'm a gal who was born in Ghana. I live here in the southern U.S. with my 3 babies that I raised with my husband. We've been here for almost 4 years now, so very much learning in terms of getting to know the roots, the history, and the culture of where I live is still an ongoing journey for me. And what I bring to the world are around my gifts of strategy, evaluation, and research. However, what threads all of it is, like you mentioned, is what are those narratives that really drive decisions, and how can leaders hone in on this space in a way that leverages not only the data that provides the evidence, but the experiences that go along with it. And like you rightly mentioned, the stories that we're either telling, hearing, or feeding ourselves as a result of that. The World Cup is happening now. Like I said, I was born in Ghana, so the sport that you really grow up with, for of any other sports, is soccer. Well, we call it football. And so that, to me, when you watch what's happening, stories and narratives are all over this experience. And that is at the heart of what I do. And the principal, so TERSHA is the combination of my husband's parents and my name Sharon put together. So that's why it's TERSHA LLC. And we're a narrative consulting company because we both love data. So we're able to tap into that. And really, I love the way my husband frames it. We're humanizing data in a way that makes sure that the stories and the lived experiences that are aligning with the data is part of the whole story, hence the narrative strategy piece. And I would like to share an example of some work that we did that kind of speaks to how we're able to leverage all these technical skill sets, but in a way that does not leave the human out of the equation. So about a few months ago, I was fortunate to partner with another colleague of mine who runs a consulting practice. And this organization, it's a nonprofit, it's one of New York's largest community anchors, and they were doing a needs assessment. Rapid needs assessment, if I might add, because they had a short time frame. So it was really learning very quickly around sort of the contextual pieces of what makes this organization what it is, and to really think about it from a community anchor perspective, all the various amazing assets that they bring to the community. So it's leaning into that. It's leaning into all the secondary data that you can pull from, everything under the sun. And this was in the space of early childhood education. So there's obviously a lot of quantitative data that you can pull from that, right? What really was interesting around how we worked was, after we pulled information, obviously, and learning the challenges in the early childhood space in that area, also speaking with individuals, and we're very strategic around talking with everybody, right? From not only the leadership, but also the folks that make up the community, which are the parents of the children that this organization serves. So learning across all these voices, you recognize that there's a lot that was coming up around transportation challenges, there's around limited program hours. But what stood out to me was, amidst all of that, parents were like, we will not change this for anything. We trust this organization. So again, going back to our goal of doing the needs assessment to inform the strategic planning for this organization, it was very critical for us to let them know this is a full picture. You're doing a great job. Like, you're kicking it. The question is, how are the opportunities for you to do better going forward? And here it is. And even the way we presented the information, even from the very beginning, like I said, we spoke with the voices that were involved throughout. So even thinking about how do you value people's times, right? So we see parents bringing their kids on at a certain time. Well, that might be the time, or when they're picking up their kids, that might be the time to have conversations with them, not to put another meeting on their busy schedules. Also thinking about things around culture and language. This is a very diverse community when it comes to how people show up culturally and linguistically. So thinking about how do we capture some of those and how we engage them in the data collection process. So we ensure that tools are provided in more than English to allow for that to be a part of how people engaged. And then finally, actually two more things as we think about engagement from the value perspective, honoring their time. So we recommended the organization do simple things like have a pizza party. So if folks are taking the time to offer their wisdom, let's recognize that. So even if we don't have funding for stipends, we can figure out a way to, people love food, bring people together. And then some of the ways to make sure that the engagement in the human aspect of it was a part of how we provided the evidence. This is where sometimes when we think about how we can leverage AI in a way that meets the human needs, we were able to tap into AI tools that converted the dense text, which, yes, that is a report you have to probably provide in the work that you do. However, also thinking about, okay, are there ways that people can engage? So we had a podcast that went with it. We had a bit of trouble reaching or having time with the executive leader, or one of the executive leaders to meet with us as part of the sense making. So we said, okay, here's a podcast. Listen to it on your drive and let us know, follow up with us and let us know some of the things that come up for you. So those are some ways. And then going back to the pizza party, so the podcast can be playing in the background as the parents are enjoying their time together over pizza. So those are some of the ways that we help organizations bring clarity into complex situations like this as it relates to how they're trying to move forward, but not losing sight of the fact that we're humans in the work, and that is also a part of it.
Wonderful explanation. The fact that you bring that humanity in, and even before we started recording, just simply how you interacted with me shows the fact that you value people over performance, over what gets done. And the fact that you do that allows you to get more done, quality value, because you started in the right place. So like what I've heard is that you have this beautiful intersection between purpose, humanity, systems, and leadership. I just want to start with that question is, how did you realize how important a story is and how even using story related to data?
The culture within which I grew up. I'm originally from Ghana. And on top of that, I was raised by my grandmother. And grandparents, for the most part, know how to weave so much breadth and depth and just complex greatness and wisdom to grandbabies that sometimes we can take it for granted. And I personally, also growing up, because I didn't know any better, just thought, oh, okay, yeah, this is great to know. And, not thinking anything about it. But when I moved away from all of that, I began to recognize how important those seeds were, because I found myself in an environment, in a world where these things were not the norm. And it was almost a daily struggle or fight around, wait a minute, is it me or is it the externalities that have issues, right? Obviously, I had to navigate that and find that duality of, okay, yes, there are some really terrible situations as it relates to the system that I'm navigating outside of my very well nurtured environment of seeing everybody who look like me. So I didn't have to question the fact that in a space where what I look like is not, from a social systems perspective, what people recognize as, oh yeah, stepping into brilliance. Yeah, typically we don't name folks like you. And I think being able to weave some of those things that grounded and fostered my growth with my nurturing and protection from grandma raising me. At the core, there's still this essence of having an open space, having my home open for the most part anywhere you go in the country. Culturally, that is a kind of people we are. And so that is automatically the person I am. Now, does that need to be nurtured? Absolutely. Because like I mentioned, that protection and that nurturing that I received in identity was tested when my environment shifted. And so there had to be this internal work of recognizing that the fact that the systems I'm navigating are not in contrast to that doesn't mean I get to let that wonderful, rich way of living go. And by the way, I am not one of only. There are a few folks who are also doing that. So maybe I am not crazy. It's just a matter of finding the right folks to navigate these systems that inherently doesn't really support the full human. So let's be real. When we talk about the dichotomy of social structures and how individuals across race, gender, and culture and language, how some of those inequities present themselves. At the root of it all is the fact that the humanness is not recognized by the system in the first place. That is the essence of distinguishing between people with these categories, which make no sense, right? However, again, as I wrap up my answer to your question, all of those things have helped shape how I see leadership and purpose in a way that cannot exclude the human, because if not, I'm perpetuating the same systems I hate that I'm trying to ensure does not live throughout the rest of my generation, and more importantly, the generation of my kids, because I'm a mom. And definitely, if things are not working out well for me now, I absolutely do not want that to be the futures for my kids. So that's where some of that comes from.
Well said. Well said. So some of the things I just heard you say, which was brilliant, what we have in our background does affect us. And you had such a beautiful, rich bringing up with your grandma. You mentioned it very purposefully, not to forget that, not to leave that behind, because whether we have the good stuff or the hard stuff in our background, we can use that to enrich our life, but we don't do it haphazardly. Did I hear you right?
Absolutely. There has to be intentionality. Part of what I didn't actually speak to was faith and how we choose to practice our faith, whatever that looks like, right? And for me, part of it is recognizing at the core, what does that look like in practice? And with somebody who believes there is a divine, and not just a divine, but an intentional divine that saw the need to create what we see and navigate and us as humans. If that intentionality started from there, why do I live my life haphazardly? There has to be intentions. Is it difficult? Absolutely. I'm not saying it's something you do in your sleep. And if anybody has figured that out, please sign me up. I want to know. But the fact that at the core, that is how I see our existence in the first place, also informs how I build that intentionality and how I show up and live my life.
Yeah. And I just want to pause a little bit. And I'm an American, born in America, have lived overseas, but back here. And you, born in Ghana, and you embrace that culture. And yet, even in your bio and everything else, you're also an American. And
Yep.
I want to say that you are what makes America great. So I'm just letting you know that we sometimes forget that the richness of other cultures, when you can be fully yourself, purposeful, and contribute so much that you're doing. So thank you for overcoming some of the obstacles that you've had to overcome and that you'll continue, so that your kids have a better life, so that the nonprofits that you're helping will be richer and fuller, and so that the people that you're helping really will live better lives. And when we live better lives, we actually help others in the future. I just wanted to acknowledge that our country and America becoming 250 years, I think it's important to recognize that we together make something better, that my culture and my background and your culture and your background together can bring a humanity that has more depth to it.
Not agree more. That is a great experiment of America, if we're being honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we will hold on to that and continue to fight for that regardless. When we were talking earlier, you mentioned something about leadership that I wanted to ask you more about. You said that leadership isn't a title. It's something that we practice with ourselves every day. What does it actually look like to lead yourself before you try to lead others?
Yes. I mean, I'm a walking case study, right? And I'm actually exploring, so this is actually a good time to do a plug that as a case study of myself, my life, my experiences through systems as a leader. I'm exploring some of these in a way that is more tangible. So that has come across as putting some, obviously, as a research trained expertise in research and evaluation. So there's methodology to doing some of this work. So gone through and looked at the evidence around what some of my exploratory questions are, and put together a synthesis of this into something that I'm developing. Initially, I was thinking about it as a framework, but the more I'm building it out, I think it might be more of a toolkit. So with that, I've decided to offer, and it's, again, we're building and piloting. So I'm seeing sort of planting the seed or tossing the seed and see, is this going to stick approach? And so I'm doing that this summer, fortunately, with the School of Radical Imagination as a course on relational leadership. Right. First off, when we look at the dictionary definition, it's to actually leader guides people on paths. Well, the last I checked, I can't be in my little corner here and just bark orders or wave a magic wand and think that because of some title that I have, there's a path that I expect somebody to go onto or follow, and that just happens. No, it starts with, because we're humans, it starts with some type of a relationship. So to me, that is the core of how we need to start thinking about leadership. Yes, the titles may just be hierarchical, or how the organizational entity is organized, that you have to have that as part of how you practice or live that purpose. But that is not the work. The work is actually the implementation of how that work happens, or the practice, or what people are seeing as a result of taking on that role. So yes, it is responsibility. And if I can go back to what I shared earlier around my faith and practicing that around intentionality, it's recognizing that these things are not just random. Yes, you might need to do that to pay a bill, but also if you're looking at your life holistically and thinking about your purpose in life, if that is a core piece of it, then it's no joke. And not only that for yourself, but also be responsible for somebody else's path. Well, heck, then I better get my act together because I don't want to fail. And therefore, by the proximity of stepping into this role, I cannot have somebody else fail if I'm responsible for that. So it's like, if we're taking this leadership thing seriously, then there are three things that I think are the sort of the principles or the why. And then when you think about it, building the foundation, those should just like lit up in your head. And those three things are the consciousness. So you actually recognizing, ooh, this is what this means. There's a consciousness, that mental acuity that you attribute to taking on the role as a leader and what that means and the responsibility that comes with it. And then the context. And this is essentially can be looked at from either an environmental or sort of situational. How are the conditions priming you to be able to do this and accept this responsibility? And then the third is a presence. So therefore, if I'm conscious about this, I know the boundaries within which I am operating. How am I showing up into the responsibility? So those are the three ways that I've sort of, based on my experiences, what I've been reading, and thinking through those pieces or characteristics are what I'm seeing evolved over my lifetime so far anyway, as the core fundamentals to pay attention to, especially when we want to do leadership in a way that is relational.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is that process that it's evolving, that your leadership hasn't arrived, but there's a curiosity and a purposefulness of growing in your leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what does that even mean to arrive, right? Because is that when we're in the grave? So yes, up until then, we keep saying the only constant in life is change. And yes, as humans, we hate change. But if it's the only constant, then we might as well embrace it, right? As painful, as hard as it is, I think sometimes that is the way that we get through, especially when the times are hard. I'm actually reading the book We Rise by Sarah Lewis. Essentially, one of the chapters goes into when we think about when there are obstacles or when there are things that we're facing and we think, okay, when we get through, we have arrived. But sometimes it's the going through itself that is you arriving. It's not some end stop. The process itself, it's you arriving. That's how I'm seeing the work of leadership.
I was curious as you were talking, I'm hearing like leaders need to be learners and curious, but there also needs to be some confidence, and there is some ego that comes with leadership. And again, I'm using that term neutral, not negative or positive. And yet I also hear the willingness to learn, which is humble, the willingness to be other centered. Do you sense any tension as a leader? Because sometimes leaders want to lead for their own ego. They have to lead, right? Or else they're not as much of a person, right? Their identity is in it. And yet as a leader, I classify myself as a leader, and it is part of my identity. Where do you see some of that tension in your own life or with other leaders that you've seen?
And absolutely, we have to name that tension. I will not be human if I said, oh, brush that off. Absolutely not. So first off, this is where I take a step back and recognize that we're humans operating in systems. So because of that, so that's why the work that I do is so critical around our strategy is us shining the mirror back at ourselves and the systems. Because of this, the systems have trained us to see leadership as more transactional, right? I need to do this, to your point, for my ego. And yes, I completely agree with you with the ego being a neutral thing, because in some essence, you need to have a certain level of ego to step into it, because it's not easy stepping into that responsibility without you having that confidence and saying, I got this. You got this because there's something in you that makes you capable of accepting that responsibility. And I think what trips us up is the how piece, and how we implement or practice that is where we can really get onto the boundary of, okay, this is just more selfishly oriented to feed that ego versus I need to leverage that ego for the purpose of a responsibility that is beyond me, right? And to me, it's because we sometimes as leaders forget that the best leader you can be is to consistently do that inner work. Look at the systems, which is why to the 3 points I made, the consciousness, the context, and the presence. That is why that is always, to your point earlier about the learning and curiosity. Those are the spaces where we're able to always go back to those fundamentals. Because when I operate from that space, I recognize that, okay, the system has trained me in a way where, for the most part, leadership is transactional. Tell you what to do, feeds my ego, we're done. But how sustainable is that? When we look at generations that are coming up, I will tell you, I mean, I'm a mom, right? And I've also seen, even with, I have 2 generations in my home. Well, I'm a millennial. I have the Gen Zs and the Gen Alpha. And I'm seeing the reality on a daily, and this is going to be our future workforce. So if those same traditional ways or transactional ways of saying, because I said so, without modeling what it looks like, is not working, then what kind of humanity in a way of actually working and sustaining our civic societies in the future? What would that look like? Who wants to live in that? So I think as leaders, which is why leaders really, when we talk about leadership, there's the piece around vision and out visioning and seeing possibilities that maybe folks who are with you or working with you alongside of you may not see, which is why you're the leader and carving out that path. That is why that responsibility is so critical, that yes, the tension is there, but if we don't recognize what the system is asking of us, which is more transactional, and therefore I need to choose differently because these systems are not working anymore, that's when we fall into that trap of repeating that cycle. And that's why we don't really have the success of leadership. And we wonder why, after in terms of timing, whether it's months or years, what we actually set out to do, we don't see those outcomes. Because to me, that missing piece is our relational piece, because we're humans doing the work with fellow humans. So therefore, guess what? We're complex. So those are some thoughts that come up for me in answer to that question.
Well said. I want to take leadership a little deeper.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that you mentioned when we talked before is that leadership has seasons: spring, summer, fall, winter. Why do so many leaders resist that winter?
Yeah.
Oh. And what are they missing? Like what would allow them to slow down, and why
Yeah.
is winter important?
My goodness. And I mean, let's be real. This is all of us, right? Including myself. And it's because, again, look at the systems. We've navigated systems that is all about rewarding that productivity. It's like, be on that wheel and get it done. It is in this time frame, or these metrics are not going to be what they are, and all that, right? When we think about leadership from a seasons perspective, and I like to ask, this is where, again, the curiosity and learning. So it's like, okay, yes, we need to do this in the metrics. But what has the evidence shown us? It's not working. So if there's something beautiful about nature and how we as humans survive in this nature where we have the seasons. And obviously, we're using this context of the four seasons, also recognizing that that is also dependent on context. Because if we're back home in Ghana, you have the two major seasons, which is the dry and the wet, which well, the rains come or there are no rain, so most of the dry. So seasons is also contextual, so wanted to name that. However, it's learning from the gift of nature that these cycles exist to also help us think about our lives, to also think about how we lead and do the work that we do. So when we miss out on the seasons of rest, and when I say that, I don't mean, okay, yes, it works for some organizations to shut down completely, which I love and respect. And typically when I'm looking for roles, I pay attention to that. Like, ooh, yes, because as a mom, around the holidays, it can be kind of tough. So if a company shuts down for those, guess what? I will pick that over one that doesn't, depending on what I'm looking for. So when we as leaders don't pay attention to these seasons that allow for us to just pause, and again, if shutting down is not an option, the question is, how are you structuring your processes where that allows for a space for creativity? So again, goes back to what I mentioned earlier around the how we do things. And we haven't had a chance, we as in people in the systems we've navigated, typically have not had a chance to practice some of these to see that they're possible, right? So we hesitate, we're scared, like, no, I don't know. You want me to do what? Give it people a whole week off? And how are we going to meet these metrics? But I'll tell you something. There is evidence that some of these things are working because some people have been brave enough to practice. Now, I might be, and I'm going to use this example, but I'm caveating the example by saying that, yes, this is Sharon's sort of take on the evidence, but I was watching the Paraguay and Germany game yesterday. For the first time, Germany is out around 32. Like, historically, that has never happened, right? And I find out that the president of Paraguay actually gave a national holiday when the team made it to round 32. Now that's huge. Now, if a whole country, I'm playing for a whole country, and the president recognizes my efforts to that extent and gives a whole holiday, I'm going to play my heart out. So these are ways to me, and answer your question around winter. So to me, that is an example, right? So they're not necessarily shutting down, but the how is recognizing your efforts in a way that is so substantial that, guess what? I'm going to celebrate you. So to me, it's not necessarily thinking about winter as, okay, shut down, don't do anything else. How are we creatively ensuring that there are spaces of how we're able to lead people to recognize their value that is not in the same rhythm of I only expect you to produce, right? When we have companies, sometimes they retreats and all of that, and that's great. But sometimes it's not about the retreat. Sometimes it's about the day-to-day operations, how we build in those seasons of just respite, and let's nurture some creativity, people. Just 5 minutes of people just sitting and laughing. Maybe that. I don't know.
One thing you mentioned I wanted to underscore is creativity comes in those spaces. Creativity comes not in the busyness, but in the pause, in the rest. So we really miss out on some of the best because of being busy, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. And don't get me wrong. I don't mean, because sometimes when you say creativity, people are quick to think about the arts. Creativity is far more than that. Dream, imagine possibilities, not just for yourself, your families, and the organization, and the world. Sometimes that is all it takes to tap into our creativity.
I know we could talk forever, but I wanted to give you space. If you have a story of a lesson learned from your life, because of what you did, you have a lesson or would have done something different, what would you want to share with us?
I'm going to focus on the project itself, where And it was all good intentions. A bunch of us subject matter experts. And I'm using those air quotes in a very like jovial manner. We're working together on the project because we were both representing different interests within the goal. So obviously that is front of mind for all of us, right? We kicked off, we're having a meeting, and because we're all having different interests coming to the meeting, and we still cared about the shared goal, there was still no cohesiveness. Every meeting, we are not making progress in meeting the goal. And then nobody will say that, okay, we're misaligned. So what do we do? So I hate meetings for meetings' sake. So one of the calls that I was facilitating, so I just said, okay, folks, imagine this work has come to an end, right? What do each of you see as contributing to what that vision looked like? And so it took away all sort of the technical constraints, the buckets of we need to do this, we need to do that, to just again shine the mirror on you. What will this time have meant to you at the end of the project? And I named that as a war story because even though I didn't have the words for it, and even though that's how I'm wired, it really showed me that was a lesson in clarity. And clarity to me is not a luxury, no. It's about, yes, that is great. But at the end of the day, the investment, my time, my brain power, the fact that I'm sitting in this meeting, right? I could be sleeping. If we just take a step back to just look at things from that perspective and recognize that the value as humans in any project, in any initiative, there is something of value. Again, that intentionality and the purpose for which I am here to even lend my voice. Clarity around that needs to be part of how we build infrastructure around. So that is my war story. And to me, one of the ways that I have learned about the power of clarity and how it's important in how we work.
Thank you for that. The power of clarity is such a key thing. Your wisdom and your humbleness and your learning play such an amazing intersection that really is bringing value to not only our conversation, but I know those that you work with. If people wanted to find you or work with you, how would they get a hold of you?
Absolutely. And so first off, thank you, because I know you'll be sharing links to all of that. So folks don't have to like pause and go find something to scramble right with. You can find me on LinkedIn. So my full name, Sharon Attipoe-Dorcoo, it comes up, and the hair looks different on my picture profile, but it's the same me with this goofy smile. So yes, I do have a website. So that gives you is essentially when people go to that page, which will be in the meeting in notes. They get to see not only about me, but also some examples of work that I've done. So I encourage people to find me that way. And truly, I just enjoy, sometimes it's a random DM send LinkedIn, or when in my email will also be in the meeting notes, Sharon.Dorcoo at TERSHALLC.com. And people finding me and just curiosity about some of the things that I've shared. And I truly do enjoy those because I see every encounter as an experience. So if the experience resonates, I want to know. So like I can know that, hey, all right, the value, right? There's something that I'm putting out in the world that is appreciated. So I truly do enjoy those conversations, and then finding aligned opportunities to work and make the world better. I am always here for it. So that's how people get.
Love that. And that's how I found you, is through LinkedIn.
Yes.
It's a great way to connect. And those DMs, it can be a very rich experience. Final question before we finish is, if you could just give one nugget of advice to nonprofits that are doing good work, what would you tell them?
Yeah. And my heart goes out to nonprofits, especially when we think about, again, looking at the systems, right? And how the gaps in these social systems, for the most part, are the ways within which nonprofits have to step in to meet the needs of communities. So I have a deep heart and respect for nonprofits. So with that, so first off, grateful to be able to have this conversation, to be able to share this with them, is that we like plans, strategic planning, what we want to do. All of that are great because, yes, clarity, right? And having a map. However, let's not get lost in the perfection of that plan. It's a plan, meaning we need to be open to possibilities and change that come along. Sometimes unwelcome because, life. But also, to me, those are also ways of experiencing humanity, because sometimes if those unwelcome things don't come, we don't grow. So embracing the unwelcome changes to the plan, and also the really nice surprises. And I'm always up for a nice surprise, right? And wake up and have a plan, and then something amazing happens. Somebody puts something on my calendar saying, let's meet. And then you never know, there's a big contract out of it. Hey, those are nice surprises. So recognizing that it doesn't start with a perfect plan, but go with the story, right? The story of, I want to do this. I might not know all the answers, but I know this is what needs to be done. I know this is my purpose, and I know the why is because I'm meeting this need for this community. Go with that story, because it's through these pockets of stories that collectively we're able to redefine the systems that we've inherited that are not supporting our lives as humans, and therefore we can propel that change together strongly by just every day taking a chance and sharing different stories from the dominant narratives. So that's how we move forward.
Well said. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom and even kindness that you've showed me on this call. We will meet again and continue our conversations.
Once in the network, always in the network.
There we go.
I love it.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for listening to What Works. Until next time, lead with clarity, conviction, and care for yourself.
That's right.
Thank you.